The village woke before the sun. Every morning, long before the first rooster crowed, smoke rose from cooking fires across the small community outside Anugu. Women swept their compounds with long brooms made from dried palm fronds. Men prepared for the farms. Children carried buckets toward the stream while older boys pushed bicycles along the dusty red roads. It was the same routine every day. Predictable, quiet, small. And in that village, everybody knew everybody's business. Especially if your name was Amara Okeke. Look at that girl. She's built like a man. No husband will want her. Those whispers followed Amara everywhere she went. At 25 years old, she stood taller than most women in the village, with broad shoulders, thick arms, and powerful legs shaped by years of hard labor. Her dark skin glowed under the morning sun, and her palms were rough from handling tools since childhood. While other women wore bracelets and admired hairstyles, Amara spent her days under broken cars with grease on her cheeks and engine oil staining her clothes. The village women never understood her. Even as a little girl, Amara had been different. While other children played with dolls near the stream, she sat beside her father in his workshop, fascinated by engines and tools. The sounds of clanking metal and revving motors excited her more than songs or gossip ever could. Her father, Obi Okeke, owned the most respected auto repair workshop for miles around. People traveled from neighboring villages just to see him. Drivers believed Obi could repair anything. Old buses, damaged motorcycles, broken trucks, even cars that other mechanics had given up on completely. The workshop sat near the edge of the village beneath a giant mango tree. The roof was old rusted zinc, and the ground was permanently stained black with engine oil. Piles of worn tires sat stacked beside cracked engines and bent metal parts. The air always smelled of petrol, smoke, and hot metal. To most people, it looked dirty. To Amara, it felt like home. She loved everything about it. The sound of tools striking metal. The hum of engines waking back to life. The satisfaction of fixing something broken. And most of all, she loved working beside her father. "Hand me the 12mm spanner," Obi said one morning as he leaned over an old taxi engine. Amara handed it to him immediately without even looking. Obi smiled slightly. "You're learning fast. I already know what's wrong with the engine," she said confidently. "Oh, really?" her father asked with amusement. "The fuel line is weak, and the spark plugs are dirty." Obi raised an eyebrow. "You checked already?" Amara crossed her arms proudly. "I listened." Her father stared at her for a moment before bursting into laughter. That was his favorite lesson. Cars speak. Most mechanics only looked. Obi listened, and now Amara did too. By the age of 13, she could change brake pads faster than grown men. By 15, she could remove and rebuild an engine. At 17, she had become stronger than many of the boys in the village simply from lifting heavy parts daily. That strength became another reason people mocked her. One afternoon at the village market, Amara carried a heavy gearbox across her shoulders while two men struggled to lift a sack of rice nearby. A group of women began laughing loudly. "Aha! See muscles. That girl is frightening. She needs a husband quickly before she turns into a wrestler." The women laughed harder. Amara kept walking as if she heard nothing. But she heard everything. Every word. Every laugh. Every insult. That evening, while washing grease from her hands outside the workshop, her mother sat beside her quietly. Her mother, Ngozi, was a gentle woman with soft eyes and endless patience. Unlike Obi, she worried constantly about what people said. "You should ignore them," Ngozi said softly. "I do. But it still hurts." Amara paused. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she shrugged. "I'm used to it." Her mother sighed sadly. "When you were born, I prayed for a daughter who would be strong," Ngozi murmured. "I didn't know God would make you stronger than everybody." Amara laughed quietly. But deep inside, the loneliness remained. Because the truth was simple. No one in the village truly understood her. Not the girls her age who spent afternoons discussing weddings and makeup. Not the boys who became uncomfortable whenever she spoke confidently. Not even the elders who constantly advised her to behave more like a woman. Only her father understood. One rainy evening, after closing the workshop, Obi and Amara sat beneath the zinc roof, listening to water drum loudly overhead. The power had gone out again. A lantern flickered weakly between them. Obi cleaned his hands slowly with an old cloth before speaking. "You fought today?" Amara groaned. "Who told you?" "Half the village." She rolled her eyes. A group of young men had mocked her earlier while she repaired a motorcycle. One of them flexed his skinny arm and laughed. "Amara is stronger than all of us." The others exploded with laughter. Usually, Amara ignored such comments. But one boy grabbed her arm mockingly. Instinctively, she shoved him away. Unfortunately for him, Amara was far stronger than she realized. The boy landed flat in the mud. Now the entire village was talking about it. Obi shook his head while hiding a smile. "You must learn patience." "He touched me first." "I know." Amara stared out at the rain. "I'm tired, Papa." "Tired of what?" "People." The answer came quietly, so quietly that Obi almost didn't hear it. "They laugh every day," she continued. "No matter what I do. If I work hard, they laugh. If I carry engines, they laugh. If I speak confidently, they laugh." Her father remained silent. "You know what hurts the most?" she whispered. "What?" "They already decided who I'm supposed to be." Obi looked at his daughter carefully. Rain poured heavily around them while thunder rumbled in the distance. "You are not small, Amara," he said firmly. "And small people fear what they don't understand." She looked down at her hands. Strong hands. Scarred hands. Hands covered in tiny cuts from years of work. "Do you ever wish I was different?" she asked. Obi's face hardened immediately. "Never." The answer came so fast that it surprised her. "You hear me?" he continued. "Never." Amara swallowed hard. "You are the finest mechanic I have ever trained." She laughed softly. "Better than your apprentices?" "Much better." "What about the men from Anugu?" Obi smirked. "Most of them are fools." That made her laugh properly. Then Obi became serious again. "The world will always try to force powerful women to become smaller," he said. "Do not allow it." Amara stared at him quietly. "You were born different for a reason." Those words stayed with her. For years. As time passed, Amara became almost legendary in nearby villages. People came specifically requesting the mechanic girl. At first, customers doubted her whenever they saw her muscular build and young face. But once they watched her work, doubt disappeared quickly. She diagnosed problems in minutes. She repaired engines others failed to fix. She worked harder than anyone in the workshop. Soon, even stubborn drivers respected her skills. But respect from customers did not stop the gossip. Whenever Amara passed through the village, conversations paused. Some women pitied her. Others feared her confidence. And many men simply felt intimidated. One Sunday after church, a woman approached Ngozi quietly. "I'm worried about your daughter," she said. Ngozi frowned. "Why?" "She is too masculine. Men don't like such things." Ngozi forced a polite smile. But later that night, she repeated the conversation to her husband. Obi nearly exploded. "Let men dislike it then," he snapped. "My daughter was not born to make weak men comfortable." Amara overheard the conversation from outside, and for the first time in weeks she smiled. Still, despite her father's support, something restless grew inside her over the years. The village became too small, too familiar, too limiting. Sometimes she stood outside the workshop after sunset watching buses drive toward the city, toward places she had never seen, toward bigger opportunities, toward a different life. She wondered what it would feel like to walk through streets where nobody knew her, where nobody had watched her grow up, where people might see her talent before judging her appearance. One evening, after a long day repairing a damaged delivery van, Amara climbed onto the roof of the workshop to escape the noise of the village. The sky above Anugu glowed with stars. The night air was cool against her skin. Below her, She could hear distant laughter and music drifting from nearby compounds. But up there, alone with the stars, she allowed herself to dream. About the city, about freedom, about becoming something bigger than the village girl everyone mocked. Footsteps sounded below. Her father climbed onto the roof carrying 2 bottles of malt. He handed one to her without speaking. For a while, they sat together in silence. Then Obi finally asked, "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you?" Amara froze. Slowly, she nodded. Her father took a long drink before answering. "I wondered when you would say it. You're not angry?" Obi looked at her as if the question itself was ridiculous. "This village was never big enough for you." Emotion tightened in her chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "That's normal. What if I fail?" Obi smiled gently. "You're my daughter," he said. "You already know how to survive." The stars shimmered brightly above them. And somewhere deep inside Amara, a new future quietly began. The decision to leave the village did not happen in one day. It grew slowly inside Amara like fire hidden beneath dry wood. Every mocking laugh, every whispered insult, every moment she stared at the distant roads leading toward bigger cities. All of it pushed her closer to leaving. Still, when the moment finally came, it felt unreal. 3 weeks after her conversation with her father on the workshop roof, Amara woke before dawn to the sound of rain tapping softly against the zinc roof of their house. She lay still on her thin mattress staring into the darkness. Today was the day. Her chest tightened immediately. For years she had dreamed about leaving the village outside Anugu. She imagined the freedom, the excitement, the opportunities waiting somewhere beyond the dusty roads she had known her entire life. But now that it was finally happening, fear crept into her heart. Not fear of hard work, not fear of failure. Amara was not afraid of struggle. She was afraid of leaving the only place she had ever known. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the sky. She sat up slowly and looked around her small room. The walls were simple cement blocks painted faded cream many years ago. A tiny wooden table stood beside her bed holding a lantern, a Bible, and a framed photograph of her family. Her work clothes hung neatly beside the door, smelling faintly of grease no matter how many times she washed them. Everything in the room carried memories, and soon she would leave it behind. Amara rubbed her face tiredly before standing up. By the time she stepped outside, her mother was already awake in the kitchen area, preparing breakfast over a charcoal stove. Ngozi looked up immediately. Neither woman spoke at first. The silence itself felt heavy. Finally, her mother forced a smile. "You're awake early." "I couldn't sleep." Ngozi nodded slowly as if she expected that answer. The smell of boiling yam and pepper sauce filled the cool morning air. Rainwater dripped steadily from the roof while distant roosters crowed across the village. Everything felt painfully familiar. Amara suddenly wondered how long it would be before she saw all of this again. Her mother noticed the sadness in her eyes immediately. "You can still change your mind," Ngozi said softly. Amara smiled weakly. "You know I won't." Ngozi sighed and returned to stirring the pot. For weeks, her mother had tried to hide her worry, but it was impossible. Unlike Obi, who believed Amara was destined for something greater, Ngozi feared the city deeply. To her, cities swallowed innocent people whole. Crime, loneliness, danger, bad influences. She had heard too many terrible stories. "What if people in the city are cruel too?" Ngozi asked quietly. Amara sat beside her. "Then I'll survive that too." Her mother reached over and touched her hand gently. "You always speak like you're stronger than pain." Amara looked away. "No," she admitted softly. "I've just had practice." That answer nearly broke Ngozi's heart. Before she could reply, heavy footsteps approached from outside. Obi entered carrying an old travel bag over one shoulder. "You're still talking instead of eating?" he grumbled. But his voice carried warmth. Amara smiled immediately. Her father looked exhausted. He had spent most of the previous night repairing a delivery truck for a customer desperate to leave before sunrise. Yet despite the lack of sleep, he still stood tall and steady, his broad hands blackened with engine grease. Obi placed the travel bag beside Amara. I fixed the zipper, he said. Amara touched the worn fabric carefully. The bag itself was old, faded from years of use. Her father had once traveled with it long before she was born while apprenticing under another mechanic in a different town. You kept this all these years? She asked. Obi shrugged. It still works. That was how her father viewed most things. If something still worked, you valued it. Amara opened the bag slowly. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a towel, soap, a flashlight, and wrapped carefully at the bottom, tools. Her eyes widened. Not just any tools. His tools. The old spanners and screwdrivers he trusted more than some people. Amara looked up immediately. Papa, you'll need them. She stared at the tools silently. Every scratch on the metal carried history. Years of repairs. Years of work. Years of sacrifice. Her throat tightened. You're giving these to me? Obi nodded once. My father gave them to me when I left home, he said quietly. Now they belong to you. For a moment, Amara could not speak. Then she hugged him suddenly. Obi stiffened in surprise before hugging her back firmly. Ngozi looked away quickly, wiping tears from her eyes. The rain stopped shortly after sunrise. By mid-morning, word had spread across the village that Amara was leaving for the city. People gathered near the family compound, pretending they simply happened to pass by. But Amara knew better. The village always watched everything. Some people looked genuinely curious. Others looked amused. A few looked almost excited to see whether she would fail. As Amara carried her bag toward the roadside bus stop with her parents beside her, whispers followed behind them. She really thinks she'll survive Lagos? The city will humble her quickly. Maybe she'll finally learn how to behave like a woman there. Amara kept walking. Years ago, those comments would have wounded her deeply. Now they only strengthened her resolve. At the bus stop, several men loaded bags onto an old commercial bus preparing to leave for Lagos. The vehicle looked tired and worn out. One headlight was cracked, and smoke puffed occasionally from the exhaust pipe. Amara immediately noticed a slight knocking sound from the engine. Instinctively, she frowned. The timing belt needs adjustment, she muttered. Her father chuckled. You haven't even left yet, and you're already diagnosing vehicles. Amara smirked slightly. I can't help it. More villagers gathered nearby, watching openly now. Some shook their heads. Others stared at Amara's muscular frame as though they still couldn't understand how a woman became like her. Then an elderly man approached slowly. It was Papa Nwosu, one of the oldest men in the village. Amara respected him because, unlike many others, he rarely mocked her. He stopped in front of her and studied her quietly. So, he said finally, the mechanic girl is leaving us. Amara smiled politely. Yes, Papa. He nodded slowly. When you were little, people laughed because you were different. Amara said nothing. But difference is not always weakness, he continued. Sometimes it is destiny. The nearby villagers fell silent. Even Obi looked surprised. Papa Nwosu pointed a finger at Amara. Do not return here believing you are small. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. I won't, she promised softly. The old man nodded once and walked away. Soon afterward, the driver shouted for passengers to board. And suddenly, everything became real. Ngozi grabbed Amara tightly before she could climb into the bus. Her mother's eyes were already red from crying. You must call when you arrive. I will. Do not trust strangers. I know. Do not walk alone at night. Amara smiled gently despite her own emotions. Yes, Mama. Ngozi touched her face carefully like she was memorizing it. You've always been stubborn, she whispered tearfully. Even as a child. Amara laughed softly through rising emotion. I wonder where I got that from. Ngozi shook her head, smiling through tears. Then Obi stepped forward. Unlike Ngozi, he did not cry, but his eyes looked heavier than usual. He reached into his pocket and handed Amara folded cash. She immediately shook her head. Papa, no. You've already done enough. Take it. I can manage. His expression hardened instantly. Amara. She sighed and accepted it. Obi placed one large hand firmly on her shoulder. Listen carefully. Amara looked at him. The city will test you, he said quietly. People there will judge you too. Some will underestimate you. Some will fear you. She nodded silently. But remember this. His grip tightened slightly. You carry our name. Emotion burned behind her eyes. And you carry my training, he continued. No matter where you go, nobody can take your skill away from you. Amara swallowed hard. I'll make you proud. You already have. That nearly shattered her composure completely. The driver shouted again impatiently. Passengers were boarding quickly now. Amara hugged her mother one final time before turning toward the bus. Then she stopped suddenly. The entire village was watching her. Some curious, some doubtful, some mocking. But for the first time in her life, Amara no longer cared what they thought. Because beyond the village roads was a future nobody there could imagine. She climbed into the bus without looking back again. Inside, the seats were cramped and uncomfortable. Passengers squeezed tightly together while bags filled the overhead racks. Amara sat beside the window, clutching her father's toolbox tightly against her chest. Outside, her parents stood side by side watching silently. Ngozi wiped fresh tears continuously. Obi stood tall with his arms crossed proudly. Then finally, the bus engine roared to life. Slowly, the vehicle pulled away from the roadside. Amara pressed her forehead lightly against the window glass. The village passed by slowly. The mango tree beside the workshop. The dusty football field where children played every evening. The market roads. The church. The tiny houses she had known her entire life. All of it began disappearing behind her. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks silently. Not because she regretted leaving, but because leaving hurt more than she expected. As the bus reached the edge of the village, Amara looked back one last time. Her father raised his hand once. She raised hers back. Then the road curved, and home disappeared from view. For several minutes, Amara simply stared ahead silently while the bus rattled toward the highway. Fear twisted inside her. Excitement too. The future suddenly felt enormous. Unknown. Dangerous. Beautiful. Outside the window, the green hills of Anugu stretched endlessly beneath the brightening sky. And somewhere far ahead, beyond roads she had never traveled before, the city waited for her. The journey to Lagos took nearly 12 hours. By the time the bus finally approached the city, Amara's body ached from sitting in the cramped seat. Most passengers looked exhausted. Children cried restlessly, while traders argued loudly over luggage space and transport fees. But despite the discomfort, Amara could not sleep. She spent most of the trip staring out the window in amazement. The roads became wider the closer they got to Lagos. Villages slowly disappeared and were replaced by crowded towns, giant billboards, busy highways, and endless streams of vehicles moving in every direction. Everything felt bigger, faster, louder. At one point during the trip, the bus stopped beside a massive bridge packed with cars stretching farther than Amara could see. She blinked in disbelief. In her village, traffic meant 3 motorcycles and 1 stubborn goat blocking the road. Here, hundreds of vehicles moved endlessly like rivers of metal. A man seated beside her laughed softly at her expression. First time in Lagos? Amara nodded. The man smiled knowingly. The city can smell fear, he joked. Try not to look too shocked. Amara laughed politely, but deep inside, nervousness tightened her chest. As sunset approached, the sky burned orange above the city skyline. Tall buildings rose in the distance. Streetlights flickered alive. And then the bus entered the heart of Lagos. Immediately, the noise swallowed everything. Car horns blasted endlessly. Street hawkers shouted through traffic. Music poured from roadside shops. Engines roared. People moved everywhere. It felt less like a city and more like a living creature that never rested. Amara pressed closer to the window, overwhelmed. The air itself felt different. Heavy. Hot. Filled with petrol fumes, smoke, sweat, roasted meat, and rain-soaked concrete. Nothing about Lagos resembled home. And somehow that both thrilled and terrified her. The bus eventually pulled into a massive crowded motor park filled with shouting drivers, moving buses, and hundreds of people pushing through narrow spaces. The moment the vehicle stopped, chaos exploded. Passengers jumped down quickly. Conductors screamed destinations. Porters grabbed bags aggressively. Street children rushed between vehicles begging for money. Amara climbed down carefully with her father's toolbox clutched tightly in one hand and her travel bag hanging over her shoulder. Immediately, people surrounded her. Taxi. Fine hotel. Sister. Where are you going? Carry your load. Several voices shouted at once. Amara froze briefly. The noise hit her like a wave. In the village, she always knew everybody around her. Here, nobody cared who she was. People pushed past without apology. Everyone moved with urgency. The city did not slow down for anyone. Amara stepped aside near a concrete wall trying to think clearly. She needed somewhere safe to stay. Somewhere affordable. She reached into her pocket carefully to check the money her father had given her. Still there. She exhaled slowly in relief. Then suddenly, someone slammed hard into her shoulder. Amara staggered slightly. Watch where you're going, a man snapped before disappearing into the crowd. Before she could fully react, another person brushed roughly past her from behind. Something felt wrong instantly. Amara's eyes widened. Her hand shot toward her travel bag. The zipper was open. Cold panic flooded her body. She dropped the bag immediately and searched inside frantically. Clothes, towel, soap. But the envelope containing her money, gone. Her breathing stopped. No! She searched again desperately even though she already knew. Gone. Every naira her father gave her had disappeared. Her heart pounded violently. Then another terrible realization struck her. The side pocket holding her phone was empty too. Stolen. Amara spun around wildly searching the crowd. But there were too many people. Too much movement. Too many strangers. The thieves had vanished completely. For several seconds, she simply stood there frozen while noise roared around her. Then reality crashed down fully. No money. No phone. No contacts. No place to stay. Alone in Lagos. A lump rose painfully in her throat. Back home, Amara was strong. Capable. Respected by customers. But standing in that crowded motor park surrounded by strangers, she suddenly felt very small. A conductor nearly shoved her aside while dragging a sack through the crowd. Move there. Amara stepped away automatically. Her mind raced desperately. Think, think, think. Maybe she could report the theft. But to who? She looked around helplessly. The few police officers nearby seemed overwhelmed already, shouting at drivers and settling arguments. And even if she reported it, what would happen? Nothing. The money was gone. As darkness settled over the city, fear began creeping into her chest. Not the kind of fear caused by danger. The deeper kind. The fear of being completely alone. Amara tightened her grip on her toolbox. At least she still had this. Her father's tools. The one thing the thieves failed to steal. Hours passed slowly. She wandered through nearby streets trying to figure out what to do. Everywhere she looked, Lagos moved with brutal speed. Streetlights reflected off wet roads. Danfo buses sped recklessly through traffic. Vendors sold food beneath umbrellas lit by lanterns. Music blasted from bars and roadside shops. Life continued around her while she drifted through it like a ghost. Eventually hunger began twisting painfully in her stomach. She had eaten nothing since morning. The smell of roasted meat nearly drove her mad. At one roadside stand, a woman grilled suya over hot charcoal while customers laughed nearby. Amara stopped walking for a moment just to inhale the smell. Her stomach growled immediately. The woman noticed her staring. "You want some?" Amara hesitated, then quietly asked, "How much?" The woman named a price. Amara swallowed hard. She didn't even have enough for that. "I'm fine," she lied before walking away quickly. Embarrassment burned inside her. She had never felt helpless like this before. Back in the village, she worked for everything she needed. If there was a problem, she fixed it. But Lagos felt impossible to control. By midnight, Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body. She found herself sitting near a closed storefront beside a busy road, hugging her toolbox against her chest protectively. Cars sped past endlessly. Nobody noticed her. Nobody cared. The city swallowed struggling people every day. One more stranger meant nothing. Amara lowered her head into her hands. For the first time since leaving home, tears filled her eyes. Not loud crying, just silent tears slipping down her cheeks. She thought about her mother worrying back in the village, about her father proudly watching the bus leave, about how confident she sounded when she promised she would survive. Now she had arrived in Lagos less than one day earlier and already lost almost everything. Failure tasted bitter. A group of young men walked past laughing loudly. One glanced toward her muscular frame and smirked. "See muscles," he joked to his friends. "She fit fight armed robbers?" The others laughed as they disappeared down the road. Amara wiped her face angrily. Even here, strangers mocked her. She almost laughed bitterly at the irony. Maybe the village had been right all along. Maybe she didn't belong anywhere. But then another thought surfaced quietly beneath the pain. Her father's voice. "You carry my training. Nobody can take your skill away from you." Amara slowly lifted her head. The toolbox sat beside her. Heavy, solid, real. Inside were the tools her father trusted most. The skills he spent years teaching her still lived in her hands. And suddenly she realized something important. The thieves stole her money, not her ability. That thought alone gave her enough strength to stand again. The next morning arrived gray and humid. Amara barely slept. Her back hurt from sitting upright most of the night, but she forced herself to keep moving. She washed her face in a public restroom and tied her hair back tightly. Then she started walking again, without a destination, without a plan, but refusing to surrender. As the city fully woke up, Lagos became even louder. Traffic thickened quickly. Street vendors appeared everywhere carrying bread, fruit, drinks, and newspapers balanced on their heads. Businessmen hurried through sidewalks speaking loudly into phones. Construction workers shouted over machinery. Everywhere Amara looked, people were working, fighting, surviving. Something about that energized her slightly. Maybe she could survive here too. Hours later, hunger returned harder than before. Her legs felt heavy now from endless walking. Sweat soaked her clothes beneath the blazing afternoon heat. Still, she kept moving. Then suddenly, a loud voice shouted angrily nearby. "Why won't this stupid thing start?" Amara turned instinctively. A sleek black luxury car sat at the roadside with its hood open. Two men stood beside it. One wore an expensive suit already damp with sweat and frustration. The other, taller and calmer, wore a simple black shirt and dark trousers that somehow still looked impossibly expensive. The suited man slammed the hood angrily. "We've called 3 mechanics already." Amara slowed unconsciously. Then she heard it. Tick, tick, click, click. Her mechanic instincts activated immediately. Even from several feet away, the engine sound bothered her. That wasn't a battery issue, nor the starter. The rhythm was wrong. Amara frowned thoughtfully. Without realizing it, she stepped closer. The suited driver noticed her first. "What are you looking at?" Amara ignored the hostility and listened again carefully. Tick-click, tick-click. Then understanding flashed instantly in her mind. "The fuel connection," she murmured quietly. The taller man looked at her sharply. "What?" Amara hesitated. For a brief moment, doubt returned. She was exhausted, hungry, dirty, and standing beside a luxury car looking like a homeless stranger. But then she remembered her father's lessons. Trust your ears. Trust your skill. Amara stepped forward slowly. "That's not the battery problem," she said calmly. The driver frowned immediately. "And you know this how?" Amara looked directly at the engine. "Because I listened." The taller man stared at her with growing curiosity. And at that moment, without realizing it, Amara's entire life was about to change forever. The tall man stared at Amara carefully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Cars rushed past on the busy Lagos road while impatient drivers blasted their horns loudly. The afternoon sun reflected sharply off the black luxury vehicle, making it almost shine like glass. Around them, pedestrians moved quickly along the sidewalks, too focused on their own lives to care about one broken-down car. But Amara barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the engine. The suited driver folded his arms with clear irritation. "And what exactly are you saying?" he asked skeptically. Amara stepped closer to the car slowly. "I said it's not the battery." The driver scoffed immediately. "3 mechanics already checked it. They checked too quickly." The driver opened his mouth to argue again, but the taller man lifted one hand calmly. "Let her speak." His voice was deep and controlled, confident, the kind of voice people naturally listen to. Amara finally looked at him properly. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with calm dark eyes that studied everything carefully. Unlike the driver, he wasn't panicking or shouting despite being stranded by the roadside. Even dressed simply, there was something powerful about him. Not arrogance, control. The kind of calm that came from a man used to being obeyed. Still, Amara had no idea who he truly was. The man nodded toward the engine. "What do you think the problem is?" Amara listened again. Tick-click, tick-click. Then she crouched slightly beside the car, examining beneath the hood without touching anything yet. "The fuel connection is loose," she said finally. The driver laughed openly. "Impossible." Amara ignored him. "The engine is struggling to maintain proper fuel pressure. That clicking sound is the pump forcing uneven flow." Now even the tall man looked surprised. The driver stared at her suspiciously. "And how do you know that?" Amara glanced at him briefly. "My father taught me." The driver looked unconvinced, but the taller man's curiosity clearly deepened. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara." "Well, Amara," he said calmly, "if you're wrong, then we lose a few more minutes. If you're right," he smiled slightly, "then today becomes very interesting." The driver groaned softly. "Sir, open the hood fully," the man instructed. Reluctantly, the driver obeyed. Amara stepped forward confidently now. The moment she looked directly at the engine, her exhaustion seemed to disappear. Hunger, fear, and frustration faded into the background as instinct took over completely. This part of her life always made sense. Machines were honest. Engines didn't mock her appearance. They didn't whisper behind her back. Something was either broken or it wasn't. And if you listened carefully enough, cars always revealed the truth. Amara set her father's toolbox gently on the ground. The taller man noticed the care with which she handled it. "You travel with your tools?" She nodded while opening the box. "They're important." Inside, neatly arranged spanners and screwdrivers reflected years of use. Though old, every tool was carefully maintained. The driver watched skeptically as Amara selected a wrench. "You really think you can fix a car like this on the roadside?" Amara didn't bother responding. Instead, she leaned deeper beneath the hood, inspecting the fuel system carefully. Within seconds, she spotted the problem. One damaged connection fitting had shifted slightly loose from vibration. Tiny, easy to miss, but enough to affect the engine completely. Amara smiled faintly to herself. "Found you." She tightened the connection carefully before checking another nearby line for pressure imbalance. The tall man observed her silently the entire time. Everything about her fascinated him already. The strength in her arms, the confidence in her movements, the complete focus on her work. Most people became nervous around wealth and expensive things. Amara behaved as though the luxury vehicle meant nothing, as though only the engine mattered. "What exactly did you say your father taught you?" he asked. Amara continued working. "He taught me to listen first. To engines. To everything." That answer lingered unexpectedly in the man's mind. After another minute, Amara stepped back. "Try it now." The driver rolled his eyes. "We already tried. Just do it," the taller man said quietly. The driver entered the car reluctantly. For one brief second, silence hung in the air. Then, the engine roared alive smoothly, perfectly, no clicking, No struggling. Nothing but the deep clean hum of a powerful machine operating exactly as it should. The driver's eyes widened instantly. What? Amara folded her arms calmly. The tall man stared at her openly now. Not with simple surprise anymore. With genuine amazement. The driver climbed out quickly and checked beneath the hood himself. But, how did? Amara shrugged slightly. It wasn't difficult. The driver looked offended by that answer. 3 professional mechanics had failed. Yet this tired-looking woman fixed the problem in minutes. The taller man suddenly laughed. Not mockingly. Honestly. Warmly. The sound surprised Amara. You've embarrassed half the mechanics in Lagos today, he said. Amara allowed herself a small smile. That wasn't my intention. The man extended his hand toward her. I'm Daniel. Amara shook his hand carefully. His grip was firm but respectful. Thank you, Daniel said sincerely. It's fine. No, he corrected gently. It's not. He glanced briefly at the toolbox. You know what you're doing. Amara looked away modestly. My father is the real expert. And where is he? Back in Anugu. Daniel studied her face more carefully now. Something about her expression shifted slightly at the mention of home. Sadness. Fatigue. Something else too. You just arrived in Lagos? He guessed. Amara hesitated briefly. Yes. And already fixing luxury cars by the roadside? She laughed softly despite herself. Not exactly how I imagined my first day. Daniel smiled again. The driver, still shocked, muttered under his breath while inspecting the engine once more. This doesn't even make sense. Daniel ignored him. You haven't eaten today, have you? The question caught Amara off guard completely. She blinked. How did you know? You look exhausted. Embarrassment crossed her face instantly. She hated appearing weak. I'm fine. Daniel raised one eyebrow slightly. That wasn't an answer. Amara looked away. Truthfully, hunger now burned painfully inside her stomach. She had spent nearly 2 days surviving on almost nothing. But pride kept her silent. Daniel noticed immediately. You helped me, he said calmly. Allow me to return the favor. There's no need. There is. Before she could protest further, Daniel nodded toward the passenger side of the car. Come have lunch with me. Amara froze. Lunch? With this man? Everything about him screamed wealth now that she looked carefully. The expensive watch. The polished shoes. The luxury vehicle. Even the driver treated him with unusual respect. People like him did not invite strangers to lunch. Certainly not dirty mechanics standing on the roadside. I don't think that's a good idea, she said carefully. Why not? Amara looked down at herself. Grease-stained clothes, dust-covered boots, sweat from walking all day beneath Lagos heat. Daniel followed her gaze and immediately understood. Then he smiled. I asked for lunch, he said. Not a fashion competition. Despite herself, Amara laughed. It was the first genuine laugh she'd had since arriving in Lagos. Daniel noticed that too. And suddenly, something inside him shifted unexpectedly. He couldn't explain it yet. But this woman was unlike anyone he had ever met. Most people tried desperately to impress him once they realized who he was. Amara had not even asked. She treated him normally. Honestly, that alone felt strangely refreshing. The driver approached Daniel quietly. Sir, he murmured. Your meeting. Daniel glanced at his watch, then dismissed the concern immediately. Reschedule it. The driver looked shocked. But these investors flew in from. Reschedule. The driver nodded reluctantly. Amara stared at Daniel curiously now. What kind of man casually postponed important meetings? Daniel turned back toward her. So, he asked, will you join me? Amara hesitated. Every warning her mother ever gave her about strangers echoed inside her head. But another truth pushed against that fear. She was hungry, exhausted, alone. And for the first time since arriving in Lagos, someone was treating her with kindness instead of suspicion. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay. Daniel smiled immediately. Good. As they prepared to leave, Amara carefully closed her father's toolbox and lifted it again. Daniel noticed the weight instantly. That thing looks heavy. It is. Let the driver carry it. Amara shook her head immediately. No. The answer came fast and firm. Daniel looked surprised. She softened slightly afterward. It belonged to my father, she explained quietly. Understanding crossed his face. Then you should keep carrying it. Something warm flickered briefly inside Amara's chest at that response. Most people mocked the toolbox because it looked old and worn. Daniel respected it instantly. The driver opened the rear passenger door for them awkwardly. Amara paused before entering. She had never sat inside a car this expensive before. The leather seats looked softer than her mattress back home. Everything smelled clean and polished. She suddenly became painfully aware of the grease on her hands again. Daniel noticed her hesitation. You're allowed to sit down, he teased lightly. Amara smirked and entered carefully. As the car pulled smoothly into Lagos traffic, she stared quietly through the tinted windows while the city rushed past outside. For the first time since being robbed, something inside her relaxed slightly. Not fully, but enough to breathe again. Daniel watched her thoughtfully from beside her. He still didn't know much about this mysterious mechanic from Anugu. But one thing already felt certain. Meeting her was no accident. And neither of them yet realized how much that broken car was about to change both of their lives forever. Amara had never seen a restaurant like this before. The black luxury car moved through the crowded streets of Lagos before finally stopping in front of a massive glass building overlooking the water. Tall palm trees lined the entrance while neatly dressed security guards opened doors for arriving guests. Everything about the place looked expensive. Too expensive. Amara stared through the car window uncertainly. People stepped out of luxury vehicles wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry. Women in elegant dresses laughed softly while businessmen in tailored suits spoke into phones as they walked inside. Amara looked down at herself. Dust-covered boots. Grease-stained jeans. Oil marks on her sleeves. Suddenly she wished she had refused the invitation. Daniel noticed immediately. You're thinking too much. Amara glanced at him. I don't belong here. Daniel leaned back calmly. You repaired a car worth more than most houses while standing on the roadside, he said. Trust me. You belong wherever you choose to stand. The words caught her off guard. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Back in the village outside Anugu, people constantly made her feel out of place because of how she looked or what she loved. But Daniel said it so simply, so naturally, as if her worth was obvious. The driver stepped out first and opened the door for them. Amara hesitated again before climbing out carefully with her father's toolbox still in her hand. Daniel glanced at it and smiled faintly. You really carry that everywhere. It stays with me. Even to lunch? Amara shrugged slightly. I don't trust Lagos yet. That made him laugh. A genuine laugh. Not mocking. Not polite. Real amusement. As they walked toward the entrance, Amara noticed several people staring openly at her. Some looked confused seeing a muscular woman in mechanic clothes beside a man like Daniel. Others seemed shocked. One woman whispered something quietly to her friend while glancing toward Amara's arms. Amara was used to such looks by now. Still, discomfort crawled beneath her skin. Daniel noticed again. Without saying anything, he slowed his pace slightly so they walked side by side instead of him leading ahead. The small gesture calmed her more than he realized. Inside, the restaurant looked even more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft music floated through the air. The floors shined so brightly Amara worried her boots might stain them. A hostess approached immediately. Good afternoon, Mr. Cole. Amara blinked. The woman smiled warmly at Daniel with instant recognition. Your table is ready. Amara looked at him sharply now. Mr. Cole. The driver's nervousness. The expensive car. The instant respect from staff. Pieces were beginning to connect in her mind. Daniel noticed the look on her face. What? You come here often. Sometimes. The hostess led them toward a private corner overlooking the water. As they passed other tables, Amara felt eyes following them everywhere. especially her. She suddenly became very aware of her size and appearance again. Her shoulders, her muscular arms, the grease beneath her fingernails no matter how hard she scrubbed. Compared to the elegant women around her, she felt rough and out of place. When they finally sat down, Amara placed her toolbox carefully beside her chair. Daniel noticed the protective glance she gave it. "You love those tools. They built my life." That answer lingered with him. A waiter arrived almost immediately with menus. Amara stared at hers awkwardly. Half the dishes sounded unfamiliar, and the prices nearly made her choke. One plate cost more than her mother spent on food in a week. Daniel hid a smile when he noticed her expression. "Order whatever you want." Amara shook her head quickly. "This place is too expensive." "That's not your problem today." She hesitated before finally choosing something simple. Rice, chicken, water. Daniel ordered for himself before the waiter disappeared again. For a moment silence settled between them, but unlike awkward silence, this felt strangely comfortable. Daniel studied her carefully. Now that she sat under proper lighting, he could see exhaustion beneath her strength. Dark circles under tired eyes, tiny cuts on her rough hands, the guarded tension in her posture. This woman had clearly struggled long before today. "How long have you been fixing cars?" he asked. "Since I was little." "You learned from your father?" Amara nodded. "He owns a workshop in my village." "And he taught you everything?" A small smile appeared on her face immediately. "Yes." The warmth in her voice changed her expression completely. Daniel noticed that too. "You admire him." "He's the best mechanic I know." "Better than you?" She laughed softly. "Definitely. I'm not sure I believe that after what I saw today." Amara shook her head. "My father can hear an engine once and know exactly what's wrong. Growing up, I thought he had magic powers." Daniel smiled. "And now I know he just pays attention better than everyone else." The waiter returned with cold water. Amara drank almost the entire glass immediately before realizing what she'd done. Embarrassment flashed across her face. "Sorry." Daniel leaned back calmly. "When was the last time you ate properly?" She looked away. "Yesterday morning." Daniel frowned slightly. "You spent almost 2 days hungry?" Amara shrugged. "I didn't have a choice." Something about how casually she said it bothered him deeply. Most people he knew panicked over inconveniences. Delayed flights, slow internet, wrong reservations. But this woman lost everything in a strange city and still somehow remained standing. "How exactly did you end up stranded?" he asked carefully. Amara hesitated briefly before finally telling him. The bus ride, the crowded motor park, the theft, the missing money, the missing phone, sleeping outside, walking the city hungry. Daniel listened quietly without interrupting once. As she spoke, his expression gradually hardened. Not at her, at the situation. "You arrived in Lagos yesterday?" he asked finally. "Yes." "And you've been wandering the city alone since then?" Amara nodded. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That city park is full of thieves." "I know that now." "You should have reported it." "To who?" she asked quietly. "Nobody would care." Daniel didn't answer immediately because part of him knew she was right. Lagos moved too fast to stop for one robbed traveler. Still, hearing her say it so calmly unsettled him. The food finally arrived moments later. The smell alone nearly overwhelmed Amara. Hot jollof rice, grilled chicken, plantains, fresh juice. Her stomach tightened painfully. Daniel noticed her trying not to look too eager. "Eat," he said gently. That was all the permission she needed. Amara tried to eat slowly at first, politely, but hunger eventually defeated pride. Soon she was eating properly for the first time since arriving in Lagos. Daniel watched quietly, strangely amused and strangely affected at the same time. Most women around him obsessed over appearances during meals. Tiny bites, perfect posture, constant self-awareness. Amara simply ate because she was hungry, honest, unpretentious, real, and somehow that honesty felt refreshing. Halfway through the meal, Amara finally slowed down. "This is the best food I've tasted in my life," she admitted. Daniel smiled slightly. "You've had a difficult first day. That's one way to describe it." He leaned forward slightly. "So why come to Lagos?" Amara paused. The answer felt bigger than one sentence. Finally, she sighed softly. "In my village, people already decided who I was supposed to be." Daniel listened carefully. "They mocked me because I'm muscular, because I work on cars, because I don't behave the way women are expected to behave there." She glanced briefly at her hands. "I got tired of shrinking myself to make other people comfortable." Something inside Daniel tightened unexpectedly. The quiet pain behind her words felt real, deeply real. And Lagos was supposed to be different? I hoped so. Daniel studied her silently for several seconds. "What if it is?" he asked finally. Amara looked at him uncertainly. "What if this city becomes exactly where you belong?" She almost laughed at that. Right now Lagos felt more like a battlefield than a dream. Still, for the first time since arriving, hope flickered faintly inside her again. Daniel leaned back thoughtfully. "You know," he said casually, "my friend owns one of the biggest auto repair garages in the city." Amara blinked. "What?" "He's always complaining about finding skilled mechanics." Her heartbeat quickened immediately. "You're serious?" Daniel pulled out his phone calmly. "Very." Before she could fully process what was happening, he dialed a number. The call connected quickly. "Tony," Daniel said, "I found someone you need to meet." Amara stared at him speechlessly. Daniel listened briefly before smiling. "Yes, I know you're busy. Stop complaining." A pause. Then, "She fixed my car in under 3 minutes after 3 mechanics failed." Another pause. Daniel glanced toward Amara. "She just arrived from Anugu, and she's exceptional." Amara's chest tightened. Nobody had ever described her like that before. Exceptional. Daniel listened again before nodding. "Good. We'll come tomorrow morning." He ended the call and placed the phone down casually. Amara stared at him. "You just got me a job interview?" Daniel shrugged lightly. "Maybe." Emotion rose suddenly in her throat so fast it almost frightened her. After everything that happened, after the robbery, the hunger, the fear, this felt unreal. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because someone should." Amara looked away quickly before he noticed the sudden shine in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the massive windows, Lagos traffic moved endlessly beside the water, while afternoon sunlight shimmered across the city skyline. Inside the restaurant, surrounded by wealth and elegance, a stranded mechanic from Anugu sat across from a billionaire she still didn't fully recognize. And somewhere between roadside engines, shared laughter, and honest conversation, the first pieces of something life-changing quietly began to form between them. Amara barely slept that night. Daniel had arranged a hotel room for her after lunch despite her repeated protests. It wasn't extravagant like the restaurant, but to Amara, it felt luxurious beyond imagination. The bed alone looked softer than anything she had ever slept on before. Still, her mind refused to rest. Too much had happened in less than 24 hours. She had arrived in Lagos full of hope, then lost everything, then somehow met a stranger who repaired her faith in the city almost as quickly as she repaired his car. Now she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment repeatedly. Daniel's calm smile, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he never once mocked her appearance or questioned her abilities after seeing her work. And most importantly, the job opportunity. Her chest tightened nervously. What if she failed? What if Daniel exaggerated her skills? What if the garage owner laughed at her the same way people back home did? Amara rolled onto her side and looked toward the old toolbox resting near the bed. Her father's tools. The sight of them steadied her slightly. "You carry my training." Her father's words echoed softly in her mind again. Eventually, sometime after midnight, exhaustion finally pulled her to sleep. The next morning, Lagos was already roaring awake by the time Daniel arrived at the hotel. Amara stood outside waiting with her toolbox beside her feet. She wore clean jeans and a plain black shirt she had carefully washed the night before. Her boots were still old, but polished as best as possible. Daniel stepped out of the car and smiled immediately. "You look rested." "That's a lie," Amara replied honestly. He laughed. "I like that you don't pretend." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I start pretending now?" "Please don't." The driver opened the back door for them again. This time, Amara entered more comfortably. Not because she suddenly belonged in luxury cars, but because Daniel somehow made things feel less intimidating around him. As the car moved through traffic, Amara watched Lagos carefully through the windows. Morning crowds flooded the sidewalks. Street vendors balanced trays on their heads while weaving through traffic effortlessly. Danfo buses screeched recklessly between lanes, their conductors shouting destinations at the top of their lungs. Everything still overwhelmed her. But now excitement mixed with the fear. Maybe she truly had a chance here. Daniel glanced toward her. "Nervous?" "Yes." "Good." She frowned slightly. "Good. Nervous people care about doing well." Amara looked away thoughtfully. "You always sound calm." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's because panicking solves nothing." She laughed softly. A few minutes later, the car turned into a massive industrial area filled with workshops, warehouses, and repair garages. The smell hit immediately. Engine oil, fuel, hot metal, burned rubber. For the first time since arriving in Lagos, Amara smiled fully. This smelled like home. The car finally stopped outside a huge auto repair compound buzzing with activity. Mechanics moved everywhere beneath lifted vehicles while welding sparks flashed brightly in different corners of the garage. Engines revved loudly. Hammers struck metal rhythmically. It was chaotic, dirty, noisy, perfect. Amara stared through the window with growing amazement. "This place is huge." Daniel smiled slightly. "Tony likes money." They stepped out of the car. Immediately several workers glanced toward them curiously. More specifically, toward Amara. A muscular woman carrying a toolbox into one of the biggest garages in Lagos naturally attracted attention. Whispers started almost instantly. "Who's that?" "She came with Mr. Cole?" "Mechanic." Amara pretended not to notice, but years of experience made her hyper-aware of every stare. Daniel led her toward a large office overlooking the workshop floor. Inside sat a broad man in grease-stained overalls arguing loudly into a phone. "I told you the transmission is dead." "Dead means dead." He hung up angrily before noticing Daniel. "Finally." Then his eyes shifted toward Amara. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Tony Briggs looked exactly how Amara imagined a garage owner would look. Large, rough-faced, bald, and permanently irritated. His sharp eyes scanned her quickly. "This is the mechanic?" Daniel nodded calmly. Tony leaned back in his chair slowly. "She's smaller than I expected." Amara almost laughed. Most men in her village called her huge. Tony crossed his arms. "You fixed Daniel's car?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." Tony grunted skeptically. "Anybody can get lucky once." Daniel sighed. "Tony." "What?" "I'm running a business, not a charity." Tony stood up and motioned toward the workshop. "Come." Amara followed him outside while Daniel remained behind smiling faintly to himself. He already knew exactly how this would end. The workshop noise became louder instantly as they stepped onto the garage floor. Mechanics paused briefly to stare openly now. Some smirked. Others looked amused. A few clearly doubted her immediately. Amara recognized those looks instantly. She'd seen them her whole life. Tony stopped beside a silver SUV with its hood open. "You see that?" Amara nodded. "Customer says it overheats constantly." 3 mechanics already checked it. Amara stepped closer silently. "Fix it." Several nearby workers slowed down to watch. One young mechanic chuckled under his breath. "This should be interesting." Amara ignored him completely. The moment she looked at the engine, everything else disappeared again. Just like always, Noise faded. People faded. Doubt faded. Only the machine mattered. She examined the radiator first, then the coolant lines, then listened carefully while the engine idled. Tick, hum, whine. Amara frowned slightly. Not the radiator. Not the coolant pump either. She crouched lower. Something smelled wrong. Burning, but faint. Then she saw it. A damaged fan relay causing inconsistent cooling cycles. Tiny, easy to miss, but enough to overheat the entire engine. Amara stood up calmly. The relay is damaged. Tony narrowed his eyes. That's your diagnosis? She nodded. Replace it and the overheating stops. One mechanic laughed openly. That fast? Amara looked directly at him. Yes. The mechanic rolled his eyes dramatically. Tony motioned toward the tools. Then prove it. Amara set down her father's toolbox carefully and got to work. Within minutes, her hands moved with confident speed. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Every movement efficient. Professional. Tony watched closely now. The amusement slowly disappeared from his face. This woman knew exactly what she was doing. One mechanic beside him muttered quietly, "Her hands are steady." Tony noticed that too. Experienced mechanics always noticed hands. Bad mechanics moved nervously. Good mechanics moved with purpose. Amara worked like someone born around engines. After replacing the damaged relay, she stepped back. Start it. A nearby mechanic turned the ignition. The engine purred smoothly. Cool. Stable. Perfect. Several workers exchanged surprised looks immediately. Tony folded his arms tighter. Could have been a lucky guess. Amara shrugged. Check the temperature gauge in 20 minutes. Tony stared at her for several long seconds, then unexpectedly grinned. Well, he admitted reluctantly, you're better than half the idiots working here already. The surrounding mechanics groaned loudly. Boss! Tony ignored them. What exactly did your father teach you? Everything. Tony smirked. Good answer. Daniel approached from behind, clearly entertained. So? Tony glanced toward him. She's hired. Amara blinked. Just like that? Tony pointed a thick finger toward her. But listen carefully. Amara met his gaze steadily. This garage is rough. People here respect skill, not feelings. If you can handle the work, nobody cares you're a woman. Amara almost smiled at that. After growing up in her village, that sounded refreshing. I can handle it. Tony nodded once. Good. Then he shouted loudly across the workshop. Everybody listen. The garage quieted gradually. This is Amara. She starts today. Anybody with a problem can leave. Silence. Then one mechanic muttered dramatically, Boss has replaced us with Village Terminator. Laughter exploded through the workshop. Even Amara laughed. The tension broke instantly. Soon mechanics approached, introducing themselves one by one. Some still looked skeptical. Others already seemed impressed. One older mechanic named Cunnell shook his head while smiling. I knew you were serious when you carried your own toolbox. Amara grinned slightly. I don't let people touch my tools. Smart woman. By midday, Amara was already working beneath a damaged pickup truck beside two other mechanics. Grease stained her hands again. Sweat covered her forehead. And for the first time since arriving in Lagos, she felt useful. Not stranded. Not helpless. Useful. Every successful repair rebuilt something inside her that the robbery and fear had damaged. Nearby mechanics gradually stopped treating her like a curiosity and started treating her like one of them. Because skill spoke louder than appearance. Always. Late in the afternoon, a familiar black luxury car pulled into the garage compound. Immediately several workers straightened up. Mr. Cole is back. Daniel stepped out casually carrying a paper bag. Amara slid out from beneath the pickup truck and wiped grease from her face. What are you doing here? Daniel held up the bag. Lunch. She blinked. You came all the way here for lunch? You say that like food isn't important. Amara laughed softly. The surrounding mechanics exchanged knowing looks immediately. Tony smirked openly from across the garage. Daniel handed her the food. I figured you forgot to eat. She hesitated before accepting it. You really didn't have to do this. I know. That answer warmed her unexpectedly. They sat together on overturned toolboxes near the edge of the garage while workers pretended not to watch them. Daniel asked about her first day. Amara told him about the repairs, the mechanics, Tony's terrible attitude. Daniel laughed loudly at that. Tony insults everybody equally. It means he likes you. As they talked, Amara noticed something strange. Conversation with Daniel felt easy, natural. She never worried about saying the wrong thing around him. And Daniel seemed genuinely interested in everything she said, even small stories about engines or village life. Time passed too quickly. Eventually Daniel checked his watch reluctantly. I should go before my assistant starts threatening resignation. Amara smiled. You're important, huh? Daniel stood slowly. Terribly important. She rolled her eyes playfully. Then Daniel looked at her carefully for a moment. You seem happier today. Amara paused, then glanced around the busy garage. Mechanics shouting, engines roaring, tools clanging loudly. For most people, it probably looked chaotic. To her, it looked like opportunity. Yes, she admitted softly. Daniel smiled. Good. As his car disappeared through the garage gates, Amara watched it leave thoughtfully. Behind her, one mechanic whistled dramatically. Oh ho! Another laughed. Mr. Billionaire himself bringing lunch? Amara frowned. Billionaire. The entire garage went silent. Then everyone stared at her. You seriously don't know who Daniel Cole is? Connell asked. Amara blinked slowly. No. The mechanics burst into shocked laughter. And for the first time, Amara realized the man who had changed her life so easily was far more powerful than she ever imagined. 3 weeks passed quickly at the garage. For the first time since arriving in Lagos, Amara finally felt stable. Not comfortable yet, not fully settled, but stable. She now rented a tiny one-room apartment not far from the garage. It wasn't luxurious. The walls were cracked in places. The ceiling fan only worked when electricity decided to cooperate, and the neighborhood remained noisy almost every night. But it was hers. Every evening after work, Amara returned home exhausted, covered in grease and sweat, yet strangely satisfied, because every morning she woke up with purpose again. At Tony's garage, people no longer stared at her like she was some strange experiment. Now they respected her. Customers specifically requested her by name. Where's that tall mechanic woman? The strong one fixed my engine last week. She diagnosed my car faster than anybody. Even Tony stopped pretending he wasn't impressed, though he still insulted everyone equally. One afternoon, while Amara repaired a damaged transmission beneath a Toyota SUV, Tony shouted across the garage. Amara! Yes. If you fix this thing properly, I might finally retire. Amara slid out from beneath the vehicle smirking. You're too stubborn to retire. That's true. Nearby mechanics laughed loudly. Moments like that still surprised her. Back in the village outside Anugu, she always felt like she had to fight for respect. Here skill mattered more, and nothing else. Well, almost nothing else. Because every afternoon around lunch, one particular black luxury car still appeared at the garage. And every single time it did, the entire workshop noticed. Daniel never stayed long. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes coffee. Sometimes absolutely nothing except conversation. But no matter how busy he claimed to be, he always found time to stop by. At first, Amara assumed it was simple kindness, then friendship. But lately, something had changed. Something quieter, deeper. The mechanics noticed it long before she admitted it to herself. Oh ho! Connell teased one afternoon while tightening bolts beneath a van. Mr. Billionaire is early today. Amara rolled her eyes while pretending to focus on an engine. He's just visiting. Every day. He likes Tony. The entire garage burst into laughter immediately. Even Tony shouted from across the workshop. Lie better. Amara threw a rag at him while everyone laughed harder. But deep inside, her heart betrayed her slightly every time Daniel arrived, because somehow the loud, chaotic garage always felt calmer once he walked in. That afternoon, Daniel entered carrying takeaway containers again. The workers greeted him casually now. "Chairman, boss, bring food for all of us too." Daniel laughed while walking toward Amara. "You people are too expensive." Amara wiped grease from her hands and shook her head. "You're encouraging them. They were impossible before I arrived." "That's true," Connell shouted helpfully. Daniel handed Amara one of the food containers. "You skipped breakfast again." Her eyes narrowed immediately. "How do you know that?" "You become aggressive when hungry." Amara almost choked laughing. "I do not. You threatened a customer with a wrench yesterday." "He insulted my repair work." Daniel smiled calmly. "Exactly." Their eyes met briefly, and for one dangerous second, the noisy garage around them seemed to disappear completely. Amara looked away first. Her pulse suddenly felt too fast. Daniel noticed, and smiled faintly to himself. They sat together near the edge of the workshop while mechanics pretended not to stare openly. Conversation came naturally now. Easy. Comfortable. Daniel asked about her latest repairs while Amara complained dramatically about Lagos traffic and terrible drivers. At some point, Daniel removed his expensive watch before helping her hold a loose engine component steady. The nearby mechanics nearly lost their minds watching a billionaire casually assist inside a greasy garage. Tony walked past muttering loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Love has destroyed another rich man." The workshop exploded with laughter. Amara nearly dropped the tool in embarrassment while Daniel just shook his head smiling. Then suddenly, a deep engine purred outside the garage entrance. Every mechanic turned instinctively. A white Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly entered the compound like royalty arriving among commoners. The entire garage fell quiet. Even Tony frowned slightly. "That can't be good." The luxury car stopped smoothly near the center of the workshop. A uniformed driver stepped out first and opened the rear passenger door carefully. Then she emerged. Tall, elegant, beautiful. The woman wore dark sunglasses, expensive heels, and a fitted cream-colored outfit that probably cost more than Amara's yearly income back in the village. Everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication. She glanced around the garage with obvious disgust. Then her eyes landed directly on Daniel. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled slowly. "Daniel." Daniel's relaxed expression disappeared instantly. Not angry, just tired. "Vanessa." Amara looked between them quietly. Something cold settled in her stomach immediately. Vanessa removed her sunglasses gracefully. Her beauty was undeniable. Smooth dark skin, sharp cheekbones, perfect makeup, the kind of woman magazines probably wrote about. And standing beside her in grease-stained mechanic clothes, Amara suddenly felt painfully rough again. Vanessa's eyes shifted toward Amara slowly. The brief confusion in her expression quickly transformed into disbelief. Then amusement. "This," Vanessa said carefully, "is why you stopped answering my calls?" The garage became completely silent. Even engines seemed quieter somehow. Daniel stood up slowly. "Vanessa, this isn't the place." "Oh, I completely disagree." Her gaze remained fixed on Amara. "So this is the mechanic." Amara met her stare calmly despite the tension tightening inside her chest. "Yes." Vanessa looked her up and down openly now, lingering slightly too long on Amara's muscular arms. The grease stains, the boots, the toolbox nearby. And then Vanessa laughed softly, not kindly, cruelly. Daniel's expression hardened immediately. "Enough." Vanessa ignored him. "You left me for this?" The words sliced through the garage sharply. Several mechanics exchanged uncomfortable looks. Amara felt heat rise slowly in her chest. Not shame, anger, because she recognized this type of woman immediately. The kind who measured worth using appearance and money. Vanessa stepped closer slowly. "You know who I am?" Amara shrugged slightly. "No." That answer visibly shocked Vanessa. The mechanics behind Amara nearly burst into laughter but controlled themselves barely. Vanessa folded her arms. "I'm Vanessa Loron." Amara remained silent, clearly still unimpressed. Daniel almost smiled despite the situation. Vanessa noticed immediately and her irritation deepened. Interesting, she muttered. Then she looked directly at Amara again. Let me save you time. Daniel sighed heavily. Vanessa. She ignored him completely. Men like Daniel don't marry women like you. The entire garage froze. Amara felt every eye watching her now. Waiting. Back in her village, words like that once wounded her deeply. Too muscular. Too rough. Too different. But Lagos had changed something inside her already. And unlike before, she no longer felt ashamed of who she was. Amara stood slowly. The height difference surprised Vanessa immediately. Up close, Amara's strength became even more obvious. Years of lifting engines had shaped her into solid muscle beneath simple clothing. Vanessa instinctively stepped back half an inch before catching herself. Amara spoke calmly. You don't know anything about me. Vanessa smiled coldly. I know enough. No. Amara corrected quietly. You looked at me and decided who I am. Something dangerous flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Daniel watched silently now. Not because he enjoyed conflict, but because he wanted to see how Amara handled herself. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. You should stay away from Daniel. The command hung in the air. Amara stared at her for several seconds before answering. I don't chase people. Vanessa frowned slightly. If Daniel spends time here, Amara continued calmly, that's his choice. The simplicity of the response somehow made it stronger. Vanessa scoffed. You really think you belong in his world? Amara almost smiled, because for the first time in her life, that question no longer frightened her. She glanced briefly toward Daniel, then back at Vanessa. I spent years trying to become smaller so people would feel comfortable around me, she said quietly. I'm not doing that anymore. Silence filled the garage again. Even Tony looked impressed now. Vanessa stared at Amara uncertainly, perhaps expecting insecurity or apology. Instead, she found confidence, steady and unshaken. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on Amara the entire time. Something warm and powerful moved inside his chest watching her stand there without fear. Vanessa noticed his expression immediately, and suddenly understood something that made her stomach tighten. This was no passing fascination. Daniel genuinely admired this woman. That realization changed everything. Vanessa's face hardened instantly. She stepped closer one final time. Be careful, she warned quietly. Then she turned sharply and walked back toward the Rolls-Royce. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor while every mechanic watched silently. Moments later, the luxury car disappeared through the garage gates. And the second it vanished, the entire workshop exploded. Ha! Amara destroyed her. Did you see Vanessa's face? Tony laughed so hard he nearly dropped a wrench. Even Daniel finally smiled properly again. Amara shook her head tiredly. I hate drama. Connell pointed dramatically. Too late. Rich people drama has entered your life now. The mechanics roared with laughter again. But through all the noise, Daniel kept watching Amara quietly, because something had shifted permanently today. Vanessa saw it. The garage saw it. And deep down, he saw it too. He was falling in love with the mechanic from Anugu. After Vanessa left the garage, the energy inside the workshop remained strange for the rest of the afternoon. The mechanics tried to return to work, but everyone kept replaying the confrontation excitedly. Connell nearly injured himself laughing while retelling the story to a customer. You should have seen it, he shouted dramatically. Madame Rolls-Royce came to intimidate Amara and left looking like somebody stole her generator. The workshop exploded with laughter again. Even Tony wiped tears from his eyes. I haven't enjoyed gossip this much in years. Amara rolled her eyes while tightening bolts beneath a damaged Honda engine. You people are too dramatic. Tony pointed a greasy wrench toward her. You embarrassed a rich woman in designer shoes while wearing oil-stained boots. That's cinema. More laughter. Amara tried to ignore them, but deep inside her thoughts remained unsettled. Not because of Vanessa herself, but because of what Vanessa represented. A world Amara still did not fully understand. a world Daniel belonged to naturally. As evening approached, mechanics gradually packed up their tools and closed the garage for the night. One by one, workers headed home until only Amara remained beneath the dim workshop lights organizing equipment. The city outside buzzed with distant traffic and music while warm evening air drifted through the open garage entrance. Amara wiped grease from her arms slowly, lost in thought. Then she heard familiar footsteps behind her. "You're still here, Daniel." She turned around. He stood near the entrance wearing a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled slightly upward. Without the constant movement of the daytime garage around him, he somehow looked even more composed, calmer, more dangerous to her heart. Amara looked away quickly before he noticed. "I needed to finish cleaning." Daniel stepped closer slowly. "I wanted to check on you." Amara leaned lightly against a workbench. "I'm fine. I didn't ask if you were fine." The quiet seriousness in his voice made her glance back at him. Daniel studied her carefully. "You've been quiet since Vanessa left." Amara hesitated, then sighed softly. "She surprised me." "That tends to happen." Daniel moved closer and sat on the edge of a nearby tool cabinet. For a moment neither of them spoke. The workshop suddenly felt strangely intimate without the noise of other mechanics around them. Finally Daniel broke the silence. "I'm sorry about today." Amara frowned slightly. "You didn't do anything. She shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Amara shrugged, though her chest tightened slightly. "I've heard worse." Daniel's expression hardened immediately. "That doesn't make it acceptable." The protectiveness in his tone caught her off guard. Amara looked down at her hands. Grease still stained the lines of her palms despite repeated washing. "Was she telling the truth?" she asked quietly. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "About what?" "That women like me don't belong in your world." Silence settled heavily between them. Daniel stared at her carefully now, and for the first time since meeting her, he saw real insecurity beneath her strength. Not weakness, just old wounds. Years of judgment. Years of being told she was too different. Too much. Too wrong. Daniel stood slowly. "Amara." She didn't look up. "You know what's interesting?" he said quietly. "You've spent your whole life around people who made you feel strange for being yourself." Her throat tightened slightly. "And somehow," he continued, "you still became kind." That made her finally meet his eyes. Daniel stepped closer. "In my world," he said calmly, "most people pretend constantly. They care about appearances more than honesty. They smile while hiding knives behind their backs." He glanced briefly toward the garage entrance where Vanessa had stood earlier. "Money doesn't automatically improve people." Amara remained silent. "But you," he continued softly, "walk into a room exactly as you are." The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. "You don't pretend to be delicate when you're strong. You don't hide your intelligence to protect insecure men. You don't change yourself to impress rich people." A dangerous warmth spread slowly through her chest. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's rare." Amara looked away again because suddenly breathing felt difficult. "You make me sound special." "You are." The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No teasing. Just truth. For several long seconds neither of them moved. The garage lights hummed softly overhead while distant Lagos traffic echoed beyond the workshop walls. Amara became painfully aware of how close Daniel now stood. Close enough to smell his cologne mixed faintly with engine oil from the garage. Close enough to notice the calm steadiness in his breathing. Close enough to make her heart pound violently. She stepped back slightly. "This is dangerous." Daniel raised one eyebrow. "The garage. You know what I mean." His expression softened. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I do." Amara crossed her arms tightly, trying to regain control of herself. "You're a billionaire." Daniel sighed immediately. "There it is again." "What?" "That look." "What look?" "The one where you decide I belong somewhere you can never reach." Amara frowned. "You do belong somewhere else." "Why?" She stared at him incredulously. "Daniel, look at your life." He waited silently. You're wealthy, powerful, educated. Women like Vanessa exist in your world. And, Amara laughed softly in frustration. And look at me. Daniel's eyes moved over her carefully. Strong muscular arms still stained lightly with grease. Work boots, simple clothes, broad shoulders shaped by years of lifting engines. A woman who looked powerful instead of delicate. A woman completely unlike the polished socialites constantly surrounding wealthy men. You see a problem, Daniel said quietly. I see a woman who rebuilt an engine faster than trained mechanics. Amara shook her head. You're not listening. No, he corrected gently. You're not listening. Silence again. Then Daniel stepped even closer. So let me be very clear. Amara's breath caught. I do not care that you grew up in a village outside Anugu. Her heartbeat quickened. I do not care that you're muscular. Faster now. I do not care that your hands have grease stains. His voice lowered slightly. And I certainly do not care whether women like Vanessa approve of you. Amara swallowed hard. Because nobody had ever defended her like this before. Not so directly. Not so fiercely. Daniel studied her face quietly. You know what I actually care about? Amara could barely speak. What? The fact that I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day we met. The confession hit her like sudden electricity. For one terrifying second, everything inside her froze completely. Daniel looked almost surprised by his own honesty now. But he didn't take the words back. Amara stared at him speechlessly. No man had ever looked at her this way before. Not with pity. Not with curiosity. With genuine desire, respect, admiration, and somehow that frightened her more than rejection ever had. You barely know me, she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. I know enough. Amara looked away quickly, overwhelmed. You shouldn't say things like that. Why? Because I might believe you. The vulnerability in her voice nearly shattered him. Daniel reached out carefully then paused, silently giving her space to move away if she wanted. She didn't. Slowly, gently, he took her hand. Amara inhaled sharply. Her hands were rough from years of hard work. Scarred. Strong. Nothing like the soft manicured hands wealthy women usually offered him. And yet Daniel held her hand like it was something precious. The tenderness of it almost hurt. You know what I see when I look at you? He asked quietly. Amara shook her head slightly. A woman who survived people trying to shame her into becoming smaller. Emotion tightened painfully in her chest. A woman strong enough to leave home alone and start over in Lagos. Her eyes began burning suddenly. A woman who fixes broken things everywhere she goes. Amara laughed shakily before she accidentally cried. Just one tear at first. Then another. Embarrassed, she tried pulling her hand away quickly. Daniel held it gently. Hey, I'm not crying. You definitely are. That made her laugh through tears. I hate you. No, you don't. Amara wiped her face angrily. This is your fault. I'll accept responsibility. The softness in his voice made her chest ache. For years she trained herself not to need comfort from anybody. Need made people vulnerable. And vulnerable people got hurt. But standing there in the quiet garage beside Daniel, she suddenly understood how exhausting it had been carrying everything alone. Daniel brushed one thumb lightly across her knuckles. The gesture was so gentle it nearly broke her completely. You don't have to fight everybody all the time, he said softly. Amara stared at him silently, then finally whispered the truth she had been afraid to admit even to herself. I think about you too. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Warmer, deeper, like something inside him settled permanently. You do. Amara nodded once. And it scares me. He smiled faintly. Good. She frowned through lingering tears. Why is that good? Because I'm terrified too. That surprised her enough to laugh again. You? Yes. You don't seem scared of anything. Daniel looked at her steadily. That's because you've never seen me care about someone like this before. The honesty of it stole her breath completely. Outside, Lagos traffic continued roaring endlessly through the night. Inside the quiet garage, surrounded by engines and tools and grease-stained floors, a billionaire and a mechanic stood holding hands beneath dim workshop lights. And somewhere between fear and longing, between laughter and vulnerability, they fell in love. Life changed quietly after the night Amara and Daniel admitted their feelings for each other. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small moments that slowly became impossible to ignore. Daniel now visited the garage almost every day without pretending it was only about lunch anymore. Sometimes he arrived early in the morning carrying coffee. Sometimes he stayed late in the evening just to sit with Amara while she finished repairs. And sometimes he simply showed up because he wanted to see her smile. The mechanics at Tony's garage enjoyed every second of it. Especially Tony. One afternoon while Amara worked beneath a delivery van, Tony walked past smirking. "Your billionaire is outside again." Amara slid out from under the vehicle immediately. "He's not my billionaire." Tony snorted loudly. "That man owns half of Lagos and somehow spends more time here than in his office." Nearby mechanics burst into laughter. Connell shouted dramatically from across the workshop. "True love has entered the garage." Amara grabbed a dirty rag and threw it at him. The rag missed completely. Connell pointed proudly. "See? Love has weakened her aim." More laughter exploded through the workshop. Amara rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling anymore. That was the dangerous thing about Daniel. He made happiness feel natural. Easy. After years of being judged for who she was, Amara still found it difficult to understand why someone like Daniel looked at her the way he did. But every time she doubted herself, he somehow noticed. And every time, he reminded her without words that she was enough exactly as she was. One evening after work, Daniel took her to dinner near the waterfront in Lagos. Unlike the first restaurant he brought her to, this place felt quieter and more relaxed. Music drifted softly through the open-air terrace, while waves reflected city lights beneath the night sky. Amara leaned back in her chair watching the water thoughtfully. "You know," she said softly, "when I first arrived in Lagos, I thought the city hated me." Daniel smiled slightly. "The city hates everybody at first." She laughed. "That's comforting. It means you survived initiation." Amara shook her head smiling. "I still can't believe how fast everything changed." Daniel studied her carefully. "Do you regret coming here?" The answer came immediately. "No." And she meant it. Because despite the robbery, despite the fear, despite the loneliness of those first terrible days, Lagos had given her something her village never could. Freedom to become herself fully. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand naturally now. The gesture still sent warmth racing through her chest every single time. "You know what I like most about you?" he asked quietly. Amara raised one eyebrow. "I'm scared to ask." "You never treat me differently because of money." She frowned slightly. "Should I?" "Most people do." Amara looked at him thoughtfully. "Honestly, Daniel, sometimes I forget you're rich." He laughed loudly. "That might be the nicest insult anyone has ever given me." She grinned. Then her expression softened slightly. "I see the way people behave around you." Daniel already understood what she meant. The forced politeness, the fear, the constant need to impress him. It exhausted him more than anyone realized. But Amara never performed around him, never pretended, never became smaller or sweeter or more delicate for his comfort. She challenged him, teased him, argued with him, looked directly into his eyes without fear. And Daniel loved her more every day because of it. Still, not everyone shared that happiness, especially Vanessa. The rumors about Daniel and the mechanic had already begun spreading through wealthy Lagos social circles. At first, people treated it like gossip, a temporary fascination, something amusing. But as weeks passed and Daniel continued openly spending time at the garage, the gossip transformed into something more serious. And Vanessa hated every second of it. She heard the whispers at parties, saw the headlines online. The billionaire and the mechanic. Daniel Cole's new mystery woman. Who is the muscular mechanic capturing Lagos' attention? Vanessa told herself she didn't care. But deep down, humiliation burned inside her. Because Daniel never looked at her the way he looked at Amara. Not even when they were together. And that realization poisoned her pride. 2 days later, Tony's garage buzzed loudly with afternoon activity. Engines roared. Music played from an old speaker near the office. Mechanics shouted over tools and machinery while customers waited impatiently beside vehicles. Amara stood near the center of the workshop repairing a damaged alternator when the familiar sound of a luxury engine purred outside again. Several mechanics looked up immediately. Connell groaned dramatically. "Please tell me rich people are not fighting again today." Tony sighed heavily. "I'm too old for billionaire romance problems." The white Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled smoothly into the garage compound once more. And immediately, everyone knew trouble had arrived. Vanessa stepped out looking furious. Unlike her previous visit, she made no effort to appear calm or elegant today. Anger radiated from her immediately. Her heels struck the concrete sharply as she marched straight toward Amara. The entire garage slowly went quiet again. Mechanics exchanged nervous glances. Customers stopped talking. Even engines seemed less important suddenly. Amara placed her tool down calmly and wiped grease from her hands with a cloth. Vanessa stopped directly in front of her. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. Amara remained calm. "I don't even know why you're here." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Please, don't pretend innocence." Amara folded her arms slowly. "You're angry at the wrong person." "Oh, really?" "Yes." Vanessa stepped closer aggressively. "Daniel belonged to me long before you appeared." That statement annoyed Amara instantly. Not because she felt threatened, but because of the arrogance behind it. People did not belong to other people. And after spending years being treated like an object for public judgment in her village outside Anugu, Amara hated that mentality deeply. "He's not property," Amara said firmly. Vanessa scoffed loudly. "You really believe this relationship will last?" Amara stayed silent. Vanessa looked around the greasy garage dramatically. "This," she said mockingly, "this is your world." Her eyes moved over Amara slowly again. The muscular arms, the mechanic clothes, the oil stains. Then Vanessa smiled cruelly. "You're nothing but a dirty mechanic." Silence crashed through the garage. Several mechanics stiffened immediately. Tony's face darkened dangerously. Connell muttered under his breath. "Ah, wrong thing to say." But Amara herself remained perfectly calm. Strangely calm, because for the first time in her life, words like that no longer controlled her. She had spent too many years hating herself because of other people's opinions. Too many nights wondering if maybe the village was right. Too many moments trying to become softer, quieter, smaller. Not anymore. Amara stepped closer slowly. Vanessa instinctively froze. The height difference between them suddenly felt obvious. So did the physical strength in Amara's broad shoulders and powerful arms. Not threatening, just undeniable. "You call me a dirty mechanic," Amara said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "I am a mechanic." Her voice remained calm, steady, proud. "These hands built engines before sunrise. These hands fed my family. These hands survived things your money could never teach you about." The garage became completely silent now. Every mechanic listened carefully. Even customers nearby stopped pretending not to stare. Amara looked directly into Vanessa's eyes. "So no," she continued softly, "I'm not ashamed of who I am." Something uncertain flickered briefly across Vanessa's face. Because she expected embarrassment. Instead she found confidence. Real confidence. The kind that doesn't depend on money or appearance. Vanessa recovered quickly. "You think Daniel actually belongs with someone like you?" Amara almost smiled. Then she answered with complete honesty. "I think Daniel chooses for himself." That answer hit harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa opened her mouth angrily. Then another voice interrupted. "She's right." Everyone turned immediately. Daniel stood near the garage entrance. Nobody had noticed him arrive. His expression looked calm, but his eyes were cold. Vanessa's face changed instantly. Daniel. No, he interrupted quietly. The disappointment in his voice felt sharper than anger. Daniel walked slowly toward them, past the silent mechanics, past the staring customers, until he stood beside Amara naturally, like that was exactly where he belonged. Vanessa looked between them desperately. She manipulated you, Vanessa snapped. Daniel actually laughed softly in disbelief. Amara, he asked, manipulate someone? Several mechanics snorted loudly, trying not to laugh. Daniel's expression hardened again. You came here to insult a woman because your pride is hurt. Vanessa stared at him silently. And that, he said calmly, is exactly why we ended. The words landed like a slap. Vanessa's face paled slightly. Daniel glanced briefly toward Amara, then back at Vanessa. I loved you once, he admitted honestly, but you cared more about status than kindness. Vanessa looked genuinely wounded now. And Amara? Daniel continued quietly. She's more honest and genuine than most people I've met in my entire life. The garage remained completely silent, because everyone there could feel the truth in his voice. Daniel loved this woman openly now, without hesitation, without shame. Vanessa realized it too, and that realization finally shattered the last piece of hope she carried. Her eyes burned with humiliation and anger. For several seconds she simply stared at them both. Then, without another word, she turned sharply and walked back toward the Rolls-Royce. The car disappeared from the garage moments later. Silence lingered briefly after she left. Then Tony clapped loudly once. Well, he announced dramatically, that was better than television. The entire garage exploded with laughter and cheering immediately. Connell pointed toward Daniel. Chairman has chosen mechanic love. Even customers laughed now. Amara covered her face briefly in embarrassment while Daniel shook his head smiling. Tony walked past muttering proudly. Nobody insults my workers in my garage. That warmed Amara more than she expected. As the workshop slowly returned to life again, Daniel looked down at her quietly. You okay? Amara nodded slowly. Then after a moment she smiled. Yes. And for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. After Vanessa's second visit to the garage, something changed permanently between Amara and Daniel. Not because they suddenly became more romantic. Not because they started spending every second together. But because the last shadow of doubt finally disappeared. The world now knew about them openly. And neither of them cared anymore. The newspapers and gossip blogs in Lagos became obsessed with the story. The Billionaire and the Mechanic. Daniel Cole's unexpected romance. Who is the muscular woman capturing Lagos? Photos of Daniel visiting Tony's garage spread everywhere online. Some showed him carrying lunch while Amara stood beside him in grease-stained overalls. Others captured them laughing together near broken vehicles or walking through Lagos streets late at night. People had opinions. Of course they did. Some mocked the relationship openly. Others treated Amara like some strange curiosity. But many people admired her immediately, especially women, because for the first time, they saw a woman who refused to become smaller to deserve love. And somehow, one of the richest men in the country adored her exactly as she was. At Tony's garage, the mechanics enjoyed the attention far too much. Connell practically became a celebrity in his own mind. One morning he walked into the workshop dramatically holding a newspaper. Everybody gather, he announced loudly. Tony groaned immediately. If this fool starts reading gossip articles again, I'm firing him. Too late. Connell opened the newspaper proudly. Listen to this. Daniel Cole seen smiling like a teenager beside mystery mechanic girlfriend. The entire garage burst into laughter. Amara threw a rag at him from across the workshop. Give me that newspaper. Connell dodged easily. No. The people deserve truth. Even customers nearby laughed. Tony shook his head while inspecting an engine. You know what annoys me most? What? One mechanic asked. Nobody mentions the garage. We are clearly the stars of this story. More laughter. Amara tried acting annoyed, But deep inside she still struggled to understand how life changed this quickly. Only months earlier, she arrived in Lagos alone, hungry, and robbed at a crowded bus park. Now she appeared in newspapers beside Daniel Cole. Life felt unreal sometimes. But the strangest part was this: Daniel himself never changed. Despite the attention, despite the gossip, despite the whispers from wealthy friends and business partners, he still showed up at the garage almost every day. Still sat beside Amara on overturned toolboxes. Still listened carefully whenever she spoke about engines. Still looked happiest when she laughed. One afternoon, Daniel arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee while Amara repaired a damaged Jeep. She slid out from beneath the vehicle and wiped sweat from her forehead. "You know, rich people usually avoid places this dirty." Daniel handed her coffee calmly. "Then rich people are boring." She smirked slightly. "That's probably true." Daniel leaned casually against the vehicle beside her. "You're becoming famous." Amara groaned immediately. "Please stop reminding me. You punched a customer yesterday for taking your picture." "I did not punch him." Daniel raised one eyebrow. "You threatened to." "He shoved a phone in my face while I was carrying an engine." "That sounds dangerous for him." Amara laughed softly. Daniel watched her quietly for a moment. Every day he spent around her made him more certain of his feelings. Because nothing about her was fake. Success hadn't changed her. Attention hadn't changed her. Even after becoming the center of public fascination, Amara still cared more about fixing engines properly than impressing anybody. And Daniel loved that deeply. Meanwhile, Amara found herself changing in ways she never expected. Not externally. She still wore mechanic clothes daily. Still carried heavy engines without help. Still worked long hours beside Tony's crew. But internally, she finally stopped apologizing for existing. Back in her village outside Anugu, she spent years believing something was wrong with her. Too muscular, too strong, too different, too loud, too intimidating. People repeated those words so often that eventually she believed them herself. But Daniel never treated her strength like a flaw. He admired it openly. One evening after work, they walked through a crowded Lagos market together while streetlights flickered overhead. Vendors shouted prices from every direction while music echoed through narrow streets packed with people. Amara carried 2 heavy shopping bags easily in one hand. Daniel noticed several men staring at her muscles again. But unlike before, Amara no longer lowered her eyes or tried hiding herself. She walked confidently now. Proudly. Daniel smiled slightly. "What? You've changed." Amara frowned thoughtfully. "Good change or scary change?" "Good." She looked ahead quietly. "I think I'm finally becoming myself." The honesty in her voice hit him harder than she realized. Daniel stopped walking suddenly. Amara turned toward him curiously. "What happened?" He stepped closer slowly beneath the warm glow of market lights. "I need you to understand something." Her heartbeat quickened slightly. "When I met you," he said quietly, "you were surviving." Amara listened silently. "You fought everything alone. Even kindness." That was painfully true. Daniel smiled softly. "But now you look lighter." Emotion flickered briefly across her face. Because nobody had ever described her that way before. Lighter. As though happiness itself had weight. Amara looked down briefly before speaking. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I used to think love meant becoming whatever someone else needed." Daniel frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because that's what I saw growing up. Women shrinking themselves constantly, speaking softer, dreaming smaller, pretending weakness to make men comfortable." Amara shook her head slowly. "I thought if anyone ever loved me, I would have to become less." Daniel reached for her hand gently. "And now?" She looked directly into his eyes. "Now I think real love lets people become more." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The crowded market continued moving around them while music and laughter drifted through the warm Lagos night. But inside Daniel's chest, something deep settled permanently, because this woman understood him in ways nobody else ever had. Later that week, Daniel invited Amara to one of his corporate events. At first she refused immediately. Absolutely not. Daniel laughed. Why? Because I fix engines for a living. And I don't belong at billionaire parties. Daniel leaned back calmly in his office chair. There you go again. Amara crossed her arms stubbornly. Daniel, those people will stare at me. They stare at everybody. That's not comforting. He smiled. You're scared. She glared at him. I survived Lagos armed robbers. I'm not scared of rich people. Then come. Amara groaned loudly. You're impossible. Still, she went. And surprisingly, it wasn't terrible. The event took place inside a massive luxury hotel ballroom overlooking the city skyline. Wealthy business executives filled the room discussing investments and politics beneath glittering chandeliers. Amara felt awkward immediately in the elegant dark dress Daniel helped her choose. Not because she looked bad. Actually, she looked stunning. The fitted dress highlighted her muscular frame beautifully, making her appear powerful instead of delicate. That itself felt strange. Most clothing in her life seemed designed to hide her body. Tonight, for the first time, she looked strong and beautiful simultaneously. Daniel noticed every nervous glance she made entering the ballroom. So quietly, without making a scene, he took her hand. Instant calm spread through her chest. People stared, yes. Some whispered. But Daniel never left her side once. And slowly, Amara realized something important. Half the room admired her confidence. Because unlike everyone else desperately trying to impress each other, Amara remained completely herself. At one point, an older businessman approached Daniel curiously. So this is the famous mechanic. Amara prepared herself automatically for mockery. Instead, the man smiled warmly. My daughter saw your interview online. She wants to become an engineer now. Amara blinked in surprise. The man continued smiling. She said if you can survive all this attention and still work in a garage proudly, then maybe she can stop being afraid too. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Amara's throat. After the man walked away, she stood silently for several seconds. Daniel noticed immediately. You okay? Amara nodded slowly. I never thought someone like me could inspire anybody. Daniel looked genuinely confused. Someone like you? She gestured vaguely toward herself. Daniel smiled softly. Amara. People spend their entire lives searching for the courage to be themselves. His eyes held hers steadily. You already are. That nearly destroyed her composure right there in the middle of the ballroom. Because after years of shame and loneliness, after years of trying to fit into spaces too small for her spirit, someone finally saw her fully and loved every part. Weeks turned into months. Amara became one of the most respected mechanics at Tony's garage. Daniel remained hopelessly in love with her. And slowly, piece by piece, they built something together neither of them expected to find. Peace. One evening after work, Amara sat outside her apartment watching Lagos traffic beneath the fading sunset while Daniel rested beside her. The city glowed gold around them. Warm. Alive. Beautiful. Daniel looked toward her quietly. What are you thinking about? Amara smiled softly. My father. Daniel waited patiently. When I left home, everyone thought the city would break me. She looked out across Lagos thoughtfully. But instead, Daniel squeezed her hand gently. It helped you find yourself. Amara leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. No, she whispered softly. It helped me find home again. And sitting there together above the restless city, the billionaire and the mechanic quietly realized something neither had expected when they first met beside a broken car. They weren't just building a relationship anymore. They were building a life. By the time one full year passed since Amara arrived in Lagos, her life looked nothing like the future she once imagined for herself. And somehow it looked far better. Tony's garage had become one of the busiest repair shops in the city largely because of her growing reputation. Drivers traveled from different parts of Lagos specifically asking for the mechanic woman. Some came because they genuinely needed repairs. Others came simply out of curiosity after hearing stories online. But nearly everyone left impressed. Amara's skill became impossible to deny. Even older mechanics respected her now, and Tony never missed opportunities to brag about it loudly. One afternoon, a customer stared in amazement while Amara diagnosed an engine problem within seconds. The man shook his head repeatedly. "How did you know that so fast?" Before Amara could answer, Tony appeared dramatically beside them. "She's a machine sent from heaven to repair other machines." The garage burst into laughter. Amara groaned loudly. "You become more embarrassing every day." Tony pointed proudly. "And yet I'm still your favorite boss." "That's because I only have one boss." "Exactly." Despite the joking, Amara secretly loved the garage deeply now. The noise, the grease, the workers shouting at each other constantly, felt like family, real family, and every single person there knew one important truth. Daniel was completely obsessed with her. The man barely tried hiding it anymore. He still visited almost daily despite his impossible work schedule. Sometimes he brought food for the entire garage now because mechanics kept complaining dramatically. Connell once nearly cried after Daniel arrived with enough takeaway for everyone. "Chairman," he announced emotionally, "if you ever break Amara's heart, we will attack your company." Daniel laughed loudly. "That seems illegal. Love is stronger than law." Amara nearly choked laughing. But beneath all the jokes and teasing, everyone could see how deeply Daniel loved her. It showed in small things. The way he always noticed when she was tired before she admitted it. The way he listened carefully whenever she talked about engines like her work genuinely fascinated him. The way his entire expression softened whenever she smiled. And Amara loved him just as fiercely, though sometimes the feelings still frightened her. Because loving someone that deeply meant giving them power to hurt you. One rainy evening after work, Amara sat inside Daniel's penthouse apartment, watching thunder flash across the Lego skyline. Rain hammered against the giant glass windows while soft music played quietly in the background. Daniel stood in the kitchen cooking badly. Very badly. Amara watched him struggle with vegetables while trying not to laugh. "You're cutting onions like they insulted your family." Daniel looked offended. "I'm a very capable man. You almost lost a finger 5 minutes ago. That was strategic." Amara finally laughed openly. Daniel pointed the knife toward her dramatically. "Mockery is not appreciated by hard-working chefs. You ordered half the food from a restaurant." "Details." Amara leaned back against the couch, smiling softly while watching him move around the kitchen. Moments like this still amazed her. A billionaire cooking dinner for her while complaining about onions. Life truly made no sense sometimes. Daniel eventually gave up pretending he could cook and joined her on the couch carrying 2 plates of food. Rain continued pouring heavily outside while warm yellow lights filled the apartment. For several quiet minutes, they simply sat together comfortably. Then Daniel spoke softly. "You know, you changed me." Amara glanced toward him. "How?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "Before you, everything in my life felt calculated." She listened quietly. Business deals, networking events, relationships. Everybody always wanted something. His expression softened slightly. "But you never asked me to become anything except honest." Amara looked down briefly. "That's because I fell in love with you before I fully understood who you were." Daniel smiled faintly. "And when you found out?" She laughed softly. "I thought you were insane for spending so much time in a garage." "That's fair." The rainstorm deepened outside. Thunder rolled softly across the sky. Amara rested her head against Daniel's shoulder. "You know what's funny?" she murmured. "What?" "When I first arrived in Lagos, I thought my life was over." Daniel kissed the top of her head gently. "Worst thief in history." She smiled. "They stole my money and accidentally pushed me toward you." Daniel chuckled quietly. Then his expression became thoughtful. "Do you miss home?" Amara went silent for several seconds. Finally she answered honestly. "Yes." Daniel waited patiently. "I miss my parents," she admitted quietly. "I miss hearing my father working in the workshop before sunrise. I even miss village mornings sometimes." Daniel looked down at her. Then let's visit. Amara blinked. What? Anugu. Her eyes widened slightly. You want to come to my village? Of course. She laughed nervously. Daniel, you are absolutely not prepared for my village. That sounds like a challenge. Amara tried warning him repeatedly over the next few days. The roads were rough. The village was small. People would stare. But Daniel remained stubbornly excited. And 1 week later, they made the journey together. The moment Amara stepped out of the vehicle near the village entrance, emotion hit her so suddenly it nearly stole her breath. Everything looked exactly the same. The dusty roads, the small roadside shops, the mango trees, children running barefoot through narrow paths. For one overwhelming moment, she felt like the younger version of herself still dreaming about escape beneath the village stars. Then people started noticing her. Amara, the mechanic girl, is back. Villagers gathered quickly around them, whispering excitedly. But this time the whispers sounded different. Not mocking, amazed, because the girl they once laughed at had returned transformed, confident, successful, loved, and standing beside one of the richest men in Nigeria. Daniel handled the attention surprisingly well, though he clearly struggled hiding amusement at the intense curiosity surrounding him. Children followed them through the village, openly staring. One tiny boy pointed directly at Daniel's expensive watch. "Uncle, are you rich?" Amara nearly collapsed laughing. Daniel crouched slightly beside the boy. "Unfortunately." The child nodded seriously. "Buy me bicycle." The entire street exploded with laughter. When they finally reached Amara's family compound, her mother burst into tears immediately. Ngozi hugged her daughter tightly while crying openly. "You've lost weight. Mama, that's the first thing you say? You don't eat enough." Daniel stood awkwardly nearby, trying not to laugh. Then Obi emerged from the workshop, wiping grease from his hands. For one long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other. Then Obi smiled slowly. "You survived Lagos." Emotion tightened instantly in Amara's throat. "Yes." Obi pulled her into a fierce hug. And for the first time in over a year, Amara felt completely like someone's child again instead of always being the strong one. Eventually, Obi turned toward Daniel carefully. "So," he said calmly, "this is the billionaire." Daniel looked slightly surprised. "You know about me?" Obi snorted. "The entire village knows about you." Amara covered her face in embarrassment. Her father extended his hand firmly. "Anybody who loves my daughter is welcome here." Daniel shook his hand respectfully. "And anybody who taught her engines deserves my respect forever." Obi smiled slightly at that answer. Over the next few days, Daniel experienced village life fully. And surprisingly, he loved it. He sat with Obi inside the workshop listening to stories about old engines and stubborn customers. He ate meals outside beneath evening skies filled with stars impossible to see clearly in Lagos. He watched village children stare at Amara with admiration instead of mockery now. Everything felt peaceful, real. One evening after dinner, Amara walked alone toward the old roadside where buses once stopped outside the village. The same place where she cried quietly while leaving home. The same place where fear and hope battled inside her chest. Now the air felt cooler, softer somehow. Footsteps approached behind her. Daniel. He joined her silently beside the empty roadside. "You came here a lot before leaving, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Amara nodded. "I used to stand here imagining another life." Daniel looked toward her carefully. "And now?" She smiled softly. "Now I can't believe it actually happened." Warm evening wind moved gently through the trees around them. Crickets chirped softly nearby while distant village sounds echoed through the darkness. Daniel suddenly reached into his pocket. Amara frowned slightly. "What are you doing?" But Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped in front of her slowly. And then, he knelt down. Amara froze completely. For one stunned second, the entire world seemed to stop moving. Her heartbeat thundered violently inside her chest. Daniel looked up at her with calm certainty in his eyes. The same eyes that first looked at her beside a broken car in Lagos. the same eyes that never once asked her to become smaller. "Amara Okeke," he said softly, "you changed my life the moment you opened the hood of my car." Tears immediately filled her eyes. Daniel smiled gently. "You taught me that strength can be beautiful, that honesty matters more than status, and that love should feel like peace, not performance." Amara covered her mouth shakily. "I spent years building companies," he continued quietly, "but building a life with you became the most important thing I've ever wanted." He opened the small ring box carefully. Inside, the diamond shimmered beneath the faint village lights. But Amara barely noticed it, because all she could see was him, the man who loved every version of her. The village girl, the mechanic, the strong woman everyone misunderstood. "Marry me," Daniel whispered. Amara broke instantly. Tears spilled freely down her face while laughter escaped through them at the same time. Years ago, villagers claimed no man would ever want her. Now the love of her life knelt before her asking for forever. "Yes," she whispered emotionally. Daniel's face lit up completely. "Yes, yes." He stood quickly as Amara laughed through tears, and moments later he pulled her into his arms tightly while slipping the ring onto her finger. The village night surrounded them softly, warm, quiet, perfect, and standing there beneath the stars of the same village that once made her feel too different to be loved, Amara finally understood something beautiful. She was never too much. She had simply been waiting for someone capable of loving her fully. News of the engagement spread through Lagos faster than wildfire. By the next morning, social media exploded with headlines. "Daniel Cole proposes to mechanic girlfriend. The billionaire and the mechanic are engaged." From village workshop to millionaire wedding. Tony printed 3 different newspaper articles and taped them proudly inside the garage office. "This," he announced dramatically to the mechanics, "is proof that my garage creates history." Cunnell pointed toward Amara immediately. "No, boss. Amara created history. You only shout at people." Tony looked offended. "Leadership requires shouting." The garage burst into laughter. Amara shook her head while trying unsuccessfully not to smile. Even now, standing in the middle of all the attention and excitement, part of her still struggled to believe this was real. Engaged. To Daniel. Sometimes she caught herself staring at the ring on her finger just to make sure she wasn't imagining everything. And every single time, emotion hit her chest all over again, because she remembered exactly who she used to be. The girl sitting alone outside her father's workshop in the village outside Anugu, wondering if she would ever truly belong anywhere. Now she belonged somewhere beautiful. Not because Daniel rescued her, but because together they built something honest, something strong, something real. Wedding preparations quickly became complete chaos. Daniel wanted elegance. Ngozi wanted tradition. Tony wanted unlimited food. And Cunnell somehow believed he deserved an important role in the ceremony despite nobody agreeing to this. One afternoon, the garage workers argued loudly about wedding plans while pretending to repair cars. "I should be best man," Cunnell announced confidently. Tony nearly dropped a wrench laughing. "You? Absolutely not. Why? You behave like an escaped radio presenter." Amara laughed so hard she had to sit down. Meanwhile, Daniel watched the entire scene with deep amusement. This noisy garage full of stubborn mechanics somehow became one of the happiest parts of his life. And watching Amara laugh among people who genuinely loved her made him fall even deeper in love every day. One evening, while finalizing wedding details, Daniel sat beside Amara in his apartment overlooking the Lagos skyline. Papers covered the table around them. Guest lists, venue designs, food arrangements. Amara stared at the mountain of paperwork in horror. Why does marriage require this much stress? Daniel looked equally exhausted. "I run billion-dollar companies with less paperwork." She groaned loudly and leaned backward dramatically against the couch. "Let's cancel everything and marry inside Tony's garage." Daniel considered it seriously for half a second. "Honestly? That would make Tony cry." Amara burst into laughter. Then her expression softened slightly. "You know what's strange?" "What?" I used to think weddings were only for women who looked nothing like me. Daniel frowned immediately. Amara touched her own muscular arm thoughtfully. Growing up, nobody ever described women like me as beautiful. The old insecurity still lingered sometimes. Not as deeply anymore, but enough to leave scars. Daniel turned fully toward her. Amara. She looked at him quietly. You walk into rooms and people stop breathing. She blinked. I'm serious, he continued softly. Not because you look delicate. Not because you look fragile. His hand gently covered hers. You look powerful. Emotion flickered across her face immediately. And powerful women deserve beautiful love stories too. That nearly shattered her composure completely. Amara leaned forward suddenly and kissed him before he could say anything else. Daniel smiled against her lips softly. Good response. The best. Weeks passed quickly. Soon Lagos transformed into full wedding excitement. Fashion blogs discussed Amara's style constantly. People debated whether she would wear traditional attire or modern designs. Meanwhile, somewhere back in her village, the same people who once mocked her now proudly claimed they always believed in her. Obi found this hilarious. One afternoon, while fixing an old motorcycle, a man approached him smiling too widely. Your daughter has done well. Obi smirked without looking up. Interesting, he replied calmly. I remember you once called her frightening. The man nearly swallowed his tongue. Word spread quickly after that. Nobody wanted Obi reminding them of past insults. But privately, Obi and Ngozi remained overwhelmed with pride. Their daughter had built a life beyond anything they imagined. And somehow, despite everything, she remained exactly herself. The week before the wedding, Amara returned briefly to the village again. This time, the atmosphere felt completely different. Children followed her excitedly through the roads. Women greeted her warmly. Even the men who once mocked her strength now treated her with awkward respect. One older woman stopped Amara near the market. You've become an inspiration, she admitted softly. Amara almost didn't know how to respond. Because for so many years, this village only made her feel unwanted. Now they looked at her differently, not because she changed, but because she succeeded loudly enough for them to finally understand her value. That realization felt bittersweet. Later that evening, Amara sat beside her father outside the workshop while sunset painted the sky orange above the trees. The same old workshop still stood beneath the giant mango tree. Oil stains still covered the ground. Old engines still waited patiently for repair. And somehow, being there again healed something deep inside her. Obi handed her a cold bottle of malt quietly. You're thinking too much again. Amara smiled softly. You always know. Her father leaned back comfortably. You're nervous about marriage. She laughed weakly. A little. Obi nodded slowly. That's normal. Amara stared toward the workshop thoughtfully. You know what's funny? She said quietly. If I never left this village, none of this would have happened. Obi looked at her carefully. No, he corrected gently. If you never left, you would have spent your whole life becoming smaller for people who never deserved you. Emotion tightened painfully in her throat. Her father smiled faintly. The city didn't change who you are, Amara. She listened silently. It simply placed you where your strength could finally be seen. Tears burned behind her eyes immediately. Obi noticed and smirked slightly. You cry more these days. I blame Daniel. That's fair. They both laughed softly beneath the fading evening sky. Then finally, the wedding day arrived. Lagos had never seen anything quite like it. The ceremony combined elegance and tradition beautifully. Wealthy business leaders sat beside village elders from Anugu. Mechanics from Tony's garage stood proudly beside politicians and celebrities. Two completely different worlds had come together because of love. Outside the massive venue, cameras flashed endlessly while reporters discussed the famous romance story that captivated the country. But inside, none of that mattered to Amara anymore. Inside a quiet bridal room, she stood before a mirror surrounded by soft lights while women adjusted the final details of her gown. And for a moment, she barely recognized herself. The dress fit her powerfully built frame perfectly instead of trying to hide it. Gold traditional details shimmered beautifully against rich fabric while her natural strength remained visible rather than softened. For the first time in her life, Amara looked at herself and saw every part of who she was reflected back beautifully. Strong, feminine, powerful, loved. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ngozi entered slowly, already crying. "Mama, please don't start again. I cannot help it." Amara laughed through sudden tears herself. Ngozi walked closer, carefully touching her daughter's face. "You look beautiful." The emotion in her mother's voice nearly destroyed her completely. Years ago, Ngozi worried endlessly that the world would never understand her daughter. Now the entire country celebrated her. "You know," Ngozi whispered tearfully, "when you were born, the nurse said you held her fingers so tightly she could not pull away." Amara smiled softly. "You were always strong." Emotion swelled painfully in Amara's chest. Then another knock sounded. Tony's voice boomed dramatically from outside the door. "If nobody stops me from crying, I will ruin this wedding." Amara burst into laughter immediately. The ceremony itself felt almost dreamlike. Music filled the massive hall while guests stood watching proudly. Daniel waited at the altar, looking calmer than usual on the surface. But inside, his heart pounded violently the moment the doors opened. Then he saw her. Amara walked slowly down the aisle beside her father while the entire room stared in stunned silence. Not because she looked delicate, not because she looked fragile, but because she looked magnificent, confident, radiant, completely herself. Daniel's eyes filled with emotion instantly, and suddenly none of the wealth, fame, or public attention mattered anymore. Only her. When Amara finally reached him, Daniel took her hands gently. Her strong mechanic hands. The same hands that fixed his broken car. The same hands that rebuilt her own life from almost nothing. The officiant began speaking, but Daniel barely heard any of it. Because all he could think was this: thank God she left that village. When they exchanged vows, the room became emotional almost immediately. Amara's voice shook slightly as she spoke. "You loved me before I fully loved myself." Daniel's chest tightened painfully. "And because of you," she continued softly, "I finally understand that being different was never something I needed to apologize for." Several guests wiped tears openly. Even Tony cried without shame. When Daniel spoke his vows, his voice remained steady but emotional. "You are the strongest person I have ever known," he told her quietly. "Not because of your muscles, not because of what you survived." His eyes held hers deeply. "But because you chose kindness after the world gave you every reason to become hard." Amara cried openly then. And moments later, when the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the entire room exploded with applause. Daniel kissed her while cameras flashed and cheers filled the hall. But Amara barely noticed any of it. Because standing there in Daniel's arms, surrounded by everyone who loved them, she finally felt complete. Later that night, during their first dance, soft music floated through the reception hall while golden lights shimmered around them. Daniel pulled her gently closer. "Still think you don't belong in my world?" he whispered softly. Amara smiled against his shoulder. Then she looked around the room, her parents laughing proudly, Tony dancing terribly with garage workers, village elders celebrating beside Lagos elites. Two completely different lives woven together perfectly. Finally, she looked back at Daniel. "No," she whispered. Then her smile deepened softly. "Now it's our world." And beneath the glowing lights of Lagos, the billionaire and the mechanic began the perfect life they fought so hard to build together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel.